Good afternoon, everybody. I can see that we've got 35 attendees, but there's a few more people still to arrive, so we'll give those people a minute or two to come through. But I'm pleased to welcome you to another of the updates from NPPA on the current roadmap, but even more importantly, some of the activity that's going to happen with Pay 2 over the next few months. We got good feedback about the last one of these forums we ran, and as we committed, then we will continue to have those. And thank you for the feedback that those of you that have sent on regarding the monthly updates that I've been sending after the steering committees, and we'll continue to make sure that you're involved and hearing what's happening both at the industry level as well as for Cuscal. So we've hit our expected number of attendees now, and there are a lot of you. So I'm just so excited that so many people are really engaged in this project. It is a really important strategic one. We'll touch more than just Pay 2 today, but obviously we know you're here very much for the other Pay 2 content. The other thing I'd like to do to kick off today is reintroduce. Some of you would know Pallavi Kapoor, others you wouldn't, but Pallavi's been on parental leave for the last 12 months and has come back. Pallavi's our Senior Manager for NPP, and it's really great to have her back with us and joining us today, and you'll hear a lot more from Pallavi as we move forward as well. And I'm again really pleased to be getting the full team back together. So thank you, Pallavi. We'll give a quick flick over so that everyone recognises your face for next time.
Hi everyone, nice to be back, and I look forward to working with you all.
So we've kept. I'll come back now. Thanks, Kylie. So we've had Pallavi for a couple of weeks, just reacquainting herself, but she's fully back in today, and is already really starting to kick some goals and make sure that we're keeping on track. So speaking of keeping on track, without further ado, I'll hand over to our guests from New Payments Platform Australia. So we'll start with Katrina Stewart, the acting CEO of NPPA, and she'll talk about some of the current progress and activity that is happening.
Thanks, Nathan, and thanks for the opportunity for coming along today to give a bit of an update on the New Payments Platform and where we're up to. Can you hear me all right? I'm getting, okay, great, sorry, I had to unmute. Come on. So we just wanted to touch a little bit on a bit of an update on the platform, then I'll hand over to Marnie Ryan to give a bit of an update on Pay 2, and also my colleague Sharissa Brooks to talk through some of the Pay 2 marketing activity as we get ready for go live. So just in terms of a bit of an update on the platform itself, sorry, before I do that, just a reminder that the material as it relates to Pay 2 delivery is provided in confidence and is not intended for wider distribution or disclosure. Just a bit of an update on where we are at the beginning of 2022. So we have about 107 participating financial institutions. We actually now have about 85.5 million accounts that are reachable for NPP payments, which is an increase from previous numbers we had last year. We've just recently done a survey out to all participants and identified institutions, and as a result have an expanded reach, which is a fantastic news story. We're doing about 100 million monthly NPP transactions, and pay IDs have increased to just over 10 million registered pay IDs. And we're now accounting for about 32% share of all account-to-account credit payments. So a great start to 2022. Just a bit of an update in terms of pay ID and how we're tracking there. So seeing a steady increase in registrations, up about 61% year on year, growing at about 270,000 a month. The thing that's really encouraging though is also we're starting to see an increase in the number of payments that are being initiated by the payer using a payee's pay ID. And so in January that was at 16%, which equates to about 13 million payments in that month. And we're very focused this year on working with industry, with participants and identified institutions to see how we can further leverage, in particular, PayID's confirmation of payee capabilities, particularly as there is increasing sort of regular focus around how we help customers prevent scams, and obviously PayID has a really important role to play there. So that's going to be a key focus for us in 2022. What we're also looking to do is to do some research as well to get an update on PayID awareness and usage. So some of you may recall 2 years ago we did some research when we went out to the market to ask some questions around people's awareness levels and usage of PayID, which was really useful for us in thinking about how we continue to grow that capability. And so over the next couple of months, we'll be doing a repeat of that research. And once we have the findings available, we'll be happy to share that with all participants and identified institutions as well. Just a bit of an update on some other news. So Australian Payments Plus, which brings together NPPA, BPay and EFTPOS, was officially formed in early February 2022. So that brings together Australia's 3 domestic payment companies, and we're really excited about what this means from an industry perspective. So the ability to actually start to have a more integrated view of domestic payments within the Australian market. Now that APPOS has been formed, initial focus will be on what were termed the prescribed services that were committed to the ACCC as part of the authorisation that was given to the merger. For us, this is primarily around the delivery of Pay2, and we'll touch a little bit more on what that's looking like in a minute. But other commitments that were given was also ensuring industry interoperability to pay with a QR code by June 2022. And this largely builds on a lot of the work that had already been done by the industry that was led by AusPayNet over the last year or so. Commitments were also given to explore the feasibility of developing certain services, which includes payment with a URL for, say, B2B or B2C payments. And so we'll be having some conversations on that during the year as well. Work is also underway to establish 2 advisory forums that were committed. So one is intended to bring together representatives for end users and the other for payment service providers. So over the next couple of months, there'll be focus at the AP Plus board level to establish those forums. And not surprisingly, there's also a lot of work going on to integrate the 3 payment organisations. But, you know, certainly from our perspective, we see this as a really positive and exciting development for the Australian payments industry. And so now I just wanted to hand over to Marnie, who's just going to go through a specific update on Pay2, which is really our kind of #1 priority for 2022 and the key item on our roadmap. Thanks, Marnie.
Thanks, Katrina. So as many of you are aware, our timeline for Pay2 continues to target the 30th of June 2022. Our mandatory compliance date is the 30th of June. So we are still continuing with our swift implementation and build with an planned and intended go live date for the implementation of live operations with Swift on the 13th of May. Live proving will start on the 6th of June and will complete on the 24th of June. So that is actually where we have participants who are interacting in a live environment. So they've successfully completed their testing and have moved into a live environment. And at that point in time, we'll also conduct an incident rehearsal where we'll actually see whether, you know, participants are ready to operationally support the MMS and if an incident occurred. And we also have a number of things that we're doing over the next couple of months in relation to transition to live, and you may start to hear that a little bit. So we have a series of tasks that we're focusing on to ensure that participants are ready and that they are aware of the actual go live readiness of actions that they need to take part in, but also the opportunities that they need to be prepared for. Once we have completed our commencement of live proving, we will transition into what we call go live aftercare and ramp up phase. And during that time, we'll start supporting those participants who weren't there on the 30th of June and for live proving, and we'll also monitor and continue to stabilise the platform as we ramp up across the industry. There is a infrastructure update that will happen in April that is intended just to update some minor components on the PAGs, and that is planned for mostly participants and should have minimal to no impact on any identified institutions. We will continue to monitor participants across their readiness. So you'll see that there is another readiness checkpoint that is coming up on the 29th of April. And again, that means that we're asking that identified institutions also submit their readiness checkpoints as well. Post that date, we also have our Go Live attestation. So for those participants and identified institutions who are transitioning to live, you will be submitting your Go Live attestation, which will essentially confirm that you're ready to go. For those not going live in the live proving period, there will be a process that we'll undertake, and that obviously you'll work with Cuscal to ensure that you've got all of your Go Live attestation paperwork and everything ready to go post that Go Live period, because you still need to complete that process to be able to go live, even if you aren't there for the 30th of June. In terms of activity that we're currently seeing in the market, so many of you will be aware that there are a number of things happening, and we continue to see both activity on LinkedIn and in social media, and also in other areas as well. And I think many of you are actually undertaking that activity at this point in time, but it's great to see the positive feedback and also the positive space that Pay2 is holding. In terms of the participant Go Live and readiness, so just an update on this. So we've been working with participants to review and assess readiness and plan dates to which they will enable Pay2 for their customer base, and that's been as part of those readiness checkpoints. As we've anticipated and as we've communicated throughout the Pay2 program, we've always expected that there would be an element of service variability and ramp up as we launch Pay2. As I mentioned before, Pay2 is scheduled to commence progressively rolling out on June 30, and there will be momentum after that date, where we'll see more than 100 organisations up to the end of 2022 that will see some momentum in implementing Pay2. There's also a number of participants and other organisations who are intending to send from July 2022. We haven't called those out specifically here from a commercial perspective, but there are a number that are intending to send post the 30th of June and July date. At the board and March Pay2 steering committees, we made a note, and NPPA recommended that we remain committed to Pay2 and the delivery of Pay2 and the MMS by June 30. So at this time, and as I mentioned before, we are continuing with Swift to turn the MMS on and are continuing to proceed to go live for the 30th of June. You'll notice in terms of the payer participant delivery that we've got some tranches or phases that we're calling out in this slide. So essentially what we've done is broken it up into periods where you can sort of understand where there would be some certainty around implementation. So from 30th of June right up to September, we're expecting to see a number of participants go live from payer participant delivery, and approximately at this point in time around 20 identified institutions. So by the end of September, we expect to see around 43% of NPP reachable accounts available for Pay2. By the end of the year, again, we have a number of participants who join onto Pay2, and at this point in time, another approximately 22 identified institutions will come in there. However, I will call out that there are still some dates being confirmed across the identified institution base. We've still got around about 20 to 30 who are still sort of TBC at this point in time, so we're waiting to get confirmation, and we expect that number actually will increase up to the December 22 date. Again, that represents about 47%, but that could increase by the time we get to December and with some of the momentum that we're seeing. By mid-2023, we expect both NAB and IMG to come on board. I will call out at this point in time, and you'll note on here that we currently have ANZ in a process of replanning, and we are awaiting their dates. And also Westpac and HSBC are yet to confirm their timing as well. They are just in the process of replanning However, we expect to see some updates come in the upcoming months on those. Just calling out specifically, there is a note that any organisations who are not compliant with that 30th of June date will be referred to the AP Plus Governance Committee, and there will be the non-compliance charges that may apply in that period. And just noting as well, as Katrina mentioned at the start of the presentation, this is commercial in confidence, and we would note that any particular information on actual organisational readiness should not be disclosed to any other party or published at any point in time. I will hand over to Sharissa just to provide an update on some of the messaging around that implementation.
Thanks very much, Marnie. Hi, everyone. So as Marnie has just gone through, and this is some of the messaging that we prepared for the external market in preparation for our go live. This really focusing on communicating a progressive rollout of Pay2. So you might find some of this messaging useful internally and externally around the progressive rollout from July 2022. There is significant momentum across the industry to make this happen. As we've gone through, it's a multi-year program of work requiring significant change to back office processes, technical systems, customer-facing channels, etc. There's over 100 participating financial institutions to enable their payer customers to authorise agreements. So there's a lot of work to be done, and it will be a gradual rollout that we've seen. So hopefully you might find some of this messaging useful, and for any of your project teams or any queries that you might be asked externally. We're also working, just as a note at the bottom here, on preparing for this service variability. So we'll be including some illustrative examples of what the customer experience might be, and share the outcomes of that with you once finalised, including templated messages, for example, suggesting to customers how that might be presented. We might move to the next slide if that's possible. So just to give you a quick update on some of the other marketing activities, as you would have seen, 2021, we really focused on drawing out some of the benefits and the illustrative use cases for Pay2. So for some of the leading use cases that we were focused on were an alternative to direct debit, in-app and e-commerce payments, outsourced payroll and accounts payable, e-invoicing, QR code payment initiation, and also charity use cases. So on the Pay2 user portal, pay2.com.au, and also the NPPA portal, you will find the collateral for those use cases, an infographic, a video explainer and some CX flows. We also updated the Pay2 service overview document, which links from the Prezzo, and some of that, and the use case materials also published on the initial pay2.com.au website. If we move forward to 2022, as we prepare for the delivery, we're really looking more now at payer customers and associated educational activity that would surround that. So some of the things we're looking at, we're in development of at the moment, include an explainer video, and infographics and details around what Pay2 is, what are the key benefits from a customer point of view, a number of how-to examples and processes, for example, how to authorise a Pay2 agreement, how to manage, and different use cases from a customer experience, where might they expect to see Pay2 and how it might work in those channels. We will also, looking to support early adopter activity, certainly highlighting some of the expected use cases, interviewing people who are working on Pay2. We'll be at the summit in May as well, preparing some of those Vox Pops. And just to also note, there's a long list here, but one of the things we are working on, which you'll see on the following page, is an upgraded Pay2 website, which will include more information for Pay2 users and payer customers as well. I might actually jump onto the next page, but just noting that, all of the activity that we are doing is kind of coexisting with the work that's already been undertaken in the market. This is quite a complicated chart, but we just find it useful to be able to share with you from a calendar perspective what some of the activity is that we're looking or we're in progress working on. So along the top you can see here our objectives, and then down the left hand side you can see the different audiences of the folk that we've been focused on. So for example, certainly through to the end of last year we were heavily focused on participants, identified institutions, connected institutions and the industry more broadly, with the set of assets and materials that we developed, for example the comms strategy, messaging frameworks, the Light website, all of the word marks and symbols and design principles, etc., that provided us a foundation from which to start marketing the service this year. As we move forward, we're now looking to make sure that all the third parties that are working on Pay2 have the tools that are required for them to engage from B2B and B2C's perspective with their customer bases. And then, as we get closer to the time, just supporting third party rollouts, including the customer facing channels. So as we progress nearer to the go live date, we will also then start to address consumers more directly and provide the assets that will be able to be used by participants and identified institutions and users to communicate directly to consumers as well. So some of those in the middle here, you can see on the Pay2 website, we will include customer intro video. We'll have some very simple CX flows to show customers how to engage with Pay2 in a use case example and also in their banking app examples. We'll provide marketing toolkits and, as we discussed before, some of the service variability messagings and FAQs. They're probably the main points to highlight on this page. The final point just in the bottom right hand side here is just a question that we're asked a bit around, broad kind of consumer focused educational campaign and awareness. Certainly we will support awareness to inform and educate consumers in the market, and there will be some limited budget by NPP to enable that across potentially like PR and social and digital channels, and we'll look to align that campaign and that timing with broad consumer availability. From a main educational perspective, in the lead up to go live and at go live, we certainly see it as the participants' role in customer engagement and in dialogues with their own direct customers to educate and sort of support that awareness as they own the customer relationship and also have the trust to deliver that message. Probably that's sufficient, Marnie, on that slide. And then just to give you a quick insight into this is a bit of a preview. This is in development at the moment on the consumer facing video. Just to share with you some of the language that you can see. So introducing Pay2, pay directly from your bank account for recurring bills, subscriptions and memberships. With Pay2, you can pay directly from your bank account for things that previously needed a card, like for online shopping or when using apps like food delivery or rideshare. You can see and manage these payments within your existing internet or mobile banking. Using Pay2 is easy, setting up an agreement with your BSB and account number, or better still, your Pay ID. And then just on the next page, approving an agreement within your existing internet or mobile banking app, making it a safe way to pay. You can manage all your Pay2 agreements in one secure place. You'll be able to see when a payment is due, the amount and who the payment is for. You'll soon start to see Pay2 as an option for all kinds of payments, whether it's for your electricity bill, flight, TV subscription or funding your digital wallet. Choose Pay2 and take the hassle out of payments. Find out more from your financial institution. So we're really trying to elevate the message of all the different types of instances where consumers will see Pay2, that it is safe and secure, and then it does give that that control back to consumers. Just touching on a couple of the CX flows. I think you've probably all seen the detailed flows that are available on the portal, but there are a couple of more consumer focused CX flows that we're working through at the moment, just in, again, elevating that message. It can be used for all kinds of payments, so there's recurring examples, in-app and one-off payments, and then also on e-commerce. So just bringing to life some of those examples from a consumer perspective, where they might expect to see Pay2 and how they might engage with it. I think there's one more page. And again, this is just sharing again from the control perspective within internet and online mobile banking, how consumers will expect to see Pay2 and give them the confidence and to feel that they've got control over these payments and the ability to view the details and cancel or pause amend agreements within their internet or online banking. Thanks, Vani. I think I'm handing back over to Nathan.
Thanks very much, Teresa. So the way we'll do questions, if you put them into the chat, so the Q&A icon on your navigation panel, and then I'll hand over to the appropriate person so we can make it a little bit more interactive, and you'll see faces rather than just voices. So we'll go off the slides onto the people now. So we've got a good question for you, Katrina. So why are you pushing ahead for the June 22 deadline, given that only one of the major banks will meet that deadline, and there would be others that would not be able to do that? So I guess we originally started talking about critical mass. I think that, looking at CommBank, I would certainly consider them to still have that mass, but do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Sure, thanks, Nathan. I think I would start by saying trying to mobilise the delivery of a new service across the whole industry is certainly a challenging undertaking when we're trying to bring on board over 100 organisations, as Marnie said earlier. We've had a lot of discussions around how we best approach the delivery timeframe, and it was agreed last year at the NPPA board that having a date and expecting some element of service variability was going to be preferable to give people some certainty as to when the service was going to be available and when we would start to see the progressive rollout of the service. It was always acknowledged that it was going to be progressive. We never expected to be in a position where we would have everybody ready and sort of suddenly be able to switch it on. We also wanted to avoid the situation whereby the whole industry is basically having to work at the timeframes of the slowest moving organisations, and it's about how do we start to introduce the service to the market, how do we just start to build it, how do we have some element of critical mass, as you said, Nathan, and really build it from there, as we've seen with the rollout and delivery of other payment services in the marketplace as well. And so this was also discussed at the AP Plus board meeting last week in terms of the delivery and what our preferred approach was. And it was still felt that the best approach was to continue with the 30th of June 2022 date. We've been working collectively with industry for about 5 years to roll out this service, and we have to kind of just put a stake in the ground and keep to that. And I think particularly for those organisations that have been working towards that, to give them some certainty that at that date we will go live.
So I'm going to pass the next question to you as well, Katrina, so we'll keep the camera on you. So you talked about the fact that there will be non-compliance charges levied at those participants who do not meet the deadline, but how will NPPA support and reward those that are on-time adopters and to grow usage and penetration of Pay2 as a way of differentiating service propositions?
So it's a great question. I mean, I think certainly we're very focused on working with some potential early adopters and Pay2 users that want to use the service to start to initiate payments from customers' bank account. And we've, kind of created a forum to bring some of those organisations together and talk about how we help prepare them to get ready. I mean, I think within our remit, which is, sort of as an industry operator of the infrastructure, you know, we will do everything that we can to help those organisations prepare, work with the payer participants that are going to be ready as well, in terms of how do we prepare for those specific use cases that we're likely to see in day one, how do we work through any kind of operational questions that people have in order to maximise the success of the service. I mean, obviously, you know, what people do on the send side is commercial, but we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can. You know, as Teresa said, you know, we would like to highlight organisations that are looking to use the service and some of those use cases to help generate the education and awareness, and also make sure that there's visibility from a payer customer side as well, in terms of who's starting to use the service and where they can expect to see it. So we're certainly trying to do everything that we can to facilitate those who will be ready, and then bring on board others as their individual programs get ready to go live as well.
So I might move to Marnie now, and there's some functional questions. So got a question that's talked about import and export of payment agreements, but I think what that actually is referring to is the portability. So once you've got a payment agreement, how you can move that to another financial institution. And so can you confirm the plan is still on track for that 12 months? Because clearly, if you've got some participants that are going to be 12 months late, I would hope that they will be forced to actually go on time with the whole lot, not have another 12-month delay after that.
Yeah, sure. And just to explain and put some context around that. So I think it was about readiness checkpoint 2. We were starting to see some evidence that participants were, you know, de-scoping some of those things that they thought were a challenge at that point in time. And porting was noted as one of them. There was complexity that they hadn't actually understood, and as a result of that, we took the decision to recommend that we actually move the mandatory or introduce a mandatory compliance date would be one thing, but also to de-scope the implementation of porting for day one. The date for the new requirement or the mandatory compliance date for that implementation of porting is the 30th of June. However, what we're actually actively encouraging participants to do is start from the adoption date, which is in April. So it aligns with one of the minor releases that we would normally have. And at that point in time, we're recommending and opening up the opportunity for participants to actually start implementing that. And you'd notice that with some of the timing that we had on the slide around when participants were delivering, similar to what you said, Nathan, we are hoping that as participants sort of come on board in that April period, that they will actually implement everything. And so therefore, we would like to see participants complete their mandatory compliance requirement by the 30th of June next year for porting.
So another functional question around usage and uptake. And I'll start out with the answer. So the question was asked around businesses opting out, but in fact, this is very much businesses opt in to either migrate their current direct debits to the real-time Pay2 solution or to implement a new solution for Pay2. So Cuscal's got a number of our identified institutions who are payment service providers that are rolling out payment initiation to their business customer base. Others of them are the direct debit aggregators where they're in control of that. I certainly couldn't speak to whether any of their individual customers could opt out when they're having a managed service from those providers, but I would expect they'd want the most efficient service possible. So I'm not sure that many of them would. But Marnie, what could you tell us in terms of the, I guess, looking at that question, the next one leading on from that is in those direct debit migrations, there are still a few concerns around the difference between the indemnities that are in place for direct debits and what comes in Pay2. If you could elaborate on that would be great.
So in terms of the opting out, I'll talk to that one first. We're actually seeing that there's a number of Pay2 users, we are calling them, that are offering services where you get the opportunity to gradually migrate. And as we've been talking to a number of them over the last couple of well, weeks and months, we're starting to see that implementation variability be introduced. So it's been really interesting to see how they're actually looking at providing an additional service, but with complementing that service with existing functionality. And that's where we're seeing the opportunity for them to gradually roll over and to gradually ramp up and implement. And then the second question has disappeared.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Second question was then the indemnities for those migrated DDRs and some lack of clarity around how that works.
We are actually, and at this point in time, looking to do some further work on explaining this. So it may actually give participants and identified institutions and pay-to users some more information around this. So we are working internally to provide some clarity on this, because we understand that there are some questions that are coming up. And I'm not sure if there has been some of our risk and controls framework that has been shared with your identified institutions, Nathan, but you know, we're willing and happy to provide some of that information to your teams. It's a big topic, but so I think it'd be easier if we did actually have some more detail and maybe the context around some of the use cases and some of the examples added in, and we're happy to share that with you.
Yep. So as we've talked about ramp up of payer capability, but also ramp up of payee or initiator capability. How are we going to manage the fact that there will be quite a small, literally day one, there'll be a small take up, and what's the plan to really drive understanding? And I come back to similar points around the focus on early adoption to ensure that it's not flat, doesn't fall flat.
I mean, in terms of the actual implementation, I'll talk to that and probably pass over to Katrina for some of the approaches that we're taking. But in terms of the actual implementation, we have been working quite closely with a number of the initiators and pay-to users to understand what those use cases look like. So we want the best experience to be had by both the payer and the payee in this instance, and we don't want those use cases to be failing. What we've actually even proposed is that we do some, simulations or desk-based simulations where we're actually seeing what will happen with these use cases, so that everyone understands the position that they're in and how they're actually implementing it. But also the opportunity around that service variability that we talk around, about what you can do in terms of messaging to your customers and how you should be presenting that back. That for us is critical. We don't want it to be a negative experience either for the brand of pay-to or for your customers or the pay-to users. So for us, having that and actually understanding and replaying it back to you prior to go live, and as part of the outcomes of live proving and probably the first couple of months, and as Charissa sort of talked to, the key pieces that will come out in that 3 to 4 months after we go live, we'll really talk to the examples to try and help build momentum and to actually give us an opportunity to leverage those use cases and really sort of treat them as pilots and the learnings will be actually shared with most of the industry. So that's where we're sort of targeting. Katrina, did you want to?
I might just add one more point to there. So one thing that Cuscal's doing, for example, for our payment initiators is, just as we have the APIs now that verify whether an account or whether a BSB is reachable for NPP payments, we'll have APIs that enable them to know whether a BSB is reachable for pay-to, so that they can then migrate as soon as that BSB is reachable, start to migrate their direct debits and other services over, which picks up on another question that has come up on that service variability. So both in Cuscal as a participant and then the identified institutions that are doing the initiation, we're all building to be ready to support that level of variability. So Katrina?
Thanks, Nathan. I think one of the learnings we took from the initial launch of the NPP was kind of really facing into that service variability. So obviously it's not ideal, but it is reality, and really starting to actively plan for it, as Marnie was saying, and really work through what those scenarios might look like, and how we can best prepare for it, and how do we make that customer experience as sort of optimal as it can be in the situation. So really focusing on kind of those use cases, working together on the payer participant side and on the initiator side to really sort of say, how do we bring those two together, and start from somewhere, and then really grow and expand the services as more people and organisations come on board. So that's very much our focus. You know, we want to make sure that we are also ensuring some consistency around messaging as well. So really, how as an industry do we talk about this with a common language? And that's a lot of what our focus is over the next couple of months, and try and have some consistency from a CX perspective as well. So that's sort of really our key focus. And then you know, initiators will obviously be promoting their own services as well. So, you know, how do we kind of support them while they go to market, and what they're looking to do in the early days from an activity perspective?
Well, I think that answers one of the questions around, will you be publishing the timelines for initiators? Comes back to the point around, well, a lot of that's a commercial proposition, but those of us that are on LinkedIn will have seen a lot of activity on LinkedIn from those initiators. There is a user forum for the initiators that are looking to be early adopters, and so they're being given lots of opportunity to promote. But I think that yeah, maybe that's something we need to take on, to officially recognise those early adopters, and to Shane's point, perhaps really officially recognise the banks that are going to go live as well with as early adopters for payer, so that we don't just focus on who's not going to be there. Is often the news stories focus on what's not as opposed to what is. So we've got a few other questions, but they're sort of a very similar category. I do a couple of questions around sort of categorization, because there's lots of terminology around initiators and payers and participants and identified institution, connected institutions. So for the audience we've got here today, so Cuscal is the participant that has the compliance obligation to NPPA to be compliant. As part of us being a participant, we also have a compliance obligation to work with you as our identified institutions to ensure that you're able to be compliant. So that's a back-to-back obligation that we have. So when you hear the discussion around the compliance, that will be Cuscal is assessed by NPPA on our readiness. We're also assessed on the readiness of our clients, and that's why we spend so much time focusing on getting your submissions into us, because we have to aggregate all of that and then send it off to NPPA. Those other you've got connected institutions, identified institutions, and participants can all initiate pay to payments, and while that's not a compliance obligation to initiate, it's a commercially driven side of the ledger. Obviously, we want those commercial opportunities to be successful, because without them being in the market, we don't have the payments to respond to, and that's why you'll see focus on both the initiator as well as the payer. But the initiators can be participants. So payers can be participants or identified institutions. Initiators can be the participants, connected institutions, and identified institutions. So hopefully that's been a little bit of a demystify the terminology. And I gave a webinar to our initiators on those different roles last month, but perhaps we might share something like that for you as payer institutions. Because I think those questions have come from clients that I can see are payers. So we've got a question around then, with all of those different roles, and we've seen the growth of 2 connected institutions joining NPP. So I guess the difference between an identified institution who wants to initiate payments and a connected institution is actually technically one comes via a participant and the other goes directly into the basic infrastructure. So the functionality available, depending on the participant who provides the services to the identified institution, is actually the same. So it comes down to the different business models that those organisations may wish to I guess apply to their businesses. What I would highlight though is that a connected institution is purely about payment initiation. It doesn't actually do any payments. So the outcome of a connected institution's payment initiation is it actually has to then have a payer and a receiver handle the funds. So you've got to have a business model that is very much focused around effectively like a payment gateway who wants to be part of that, as opposed to someone who wants to be a payment service provider. So if you've got questions about what model works best for you, I think the best thing is to come back to Palaville, myself, or through your account manager, talk about the use cases that you want to achieve, and we can talk to you about whether that's the way you want to go. What I would say though is that if you wanted to be an initiator, we have both the instructor and receiver flows that are supported by our solution. So as an identified institution, we can actually give you the same flows as a connected institution does. Now, it just means if you want to then have a different business model that addresses a lot broader, or you feel that there is value in you having that technical competency as opposed to the commercial competency, let's talk about how that fits best with you as well. And so we're wrapping up. I think we've got slow down in the number of questions. So as usual, we will provide the slides to this. I don't think we recorded this one, did we, Kylie? I think this is slides. We did record it. Okay, so this is a recorded one. Again, I will just reinforce that we're trying to give you as much information as possible. There definitely is commercially confidential information shared on these webinars in terms of status of specific financial institutions, and we certainly don't want to not share that with you, but that is important that is not broadcast beyond this group. So thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance, and we'll be back for one more of these before we wrap up Pay 2, but I think that the format is really successful and we should keep this going a couple of times a year, even beyond the launch, talking about general NPP roadmaps. I know that international payments will be something of great interest once the focus starts to move beyond Pay 2, so we'll perhaps talk about that one again in a couple of months' time. Thank you. Bye now.